guys feel like your studio is always a mess? Mine's always a mess. So Sony just announced the FX3 and it looks like a really cool camera. I love the way it looks, has a really cool design, but I'm a little bit torn because on paper, technically, the FX3 has a lot of similarities to the A7S III except for a few details. First of all, a few similarities. Both cameras shoot in 4K. They can shoot 4K 120, 240 and full HD. Both are full frame cameras with the same exact sensor. I mean, both cameras can take 12 megapixel stills, which is oddly similar. Both cameras have the same dynamic range, same autofocus, same 5-axis in-body image stabilization, including active mode. Both shoot in 10-bit 422 video in all codecs, can also output 16-bit raw video via HDMI. Same touch menu screen, same dual media card slots, same ports. They're both very similar cameras. Now, as far as differences goes, they are the following. The FX3 has a rectangular design, kind of similar to the A7SIII, but of the Sony cinema line, you know, the Venice, the FX9, the FX6, the FX3 is the smallest of the bunch. Personally, I really do like the design, especially with the, looks like a built-in cage around it, which is really great for filmmakers because with cameras like the A7S III, you have to get a cage, which kind of makes the entire setup look odd if you want to attach those cinema accessories. Where with the cage built around the FX3, like you don't have to buy a separate cage. You can attach your favorite camera accessories onto the FX3, like a handle, a monitor, an external mic, rods, a matte box, quick release plate, whatever you want. You get to attach all that on the FX3 because there are 5 1/4-20 threads all around the body. I think that's really cool, especially if you want to mount your camera on a gimbal or on an easy rig or on a drone. A squared off camera body is just way better for video production in my opinion. The interesting thing about the FX3 though is that it's smaller than the A7S III. With the A7S III, obviously there's that EVF on top of the camera, but since there is no EVF on the FX3, it just makes the camera shorter than the A7S III. But overall, the design of the FX3 is designed for handheld mobility. It's really meant for the solo filmmaker when you're holding a camera kind of like this. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Like you all hold cameras like that. This camera is really meant for those types of filmmakers. Now, where it really gets interesting is that the FX3 has the S-Cinetone picture profile, very similar to the Sony Venice camera. Now this is where I feel like the FX3 is the A7C of the cinema line. I'll explain that in a second. But to have a small cinema camera that can produce the same look as the Sony Venice or FX9 or FX6, I can see as being really intriguing for a lot of filmmakers. Not so much the hybrid shooters, the people that like to shoot photos and videos equally. We'll talk about them in a second, but as far as filmmakers goes, yeah, the FX3 is going to be a really good camera to have. Another unique feature about the FX3 is that it has a cooling fan on the back of the camera. Obviously, it's meant to cool down the camera if you're shooting in 4K at a high bitrate. And according to Sony, it can shoot uninterrupted 4K video at 60 frames per second. Another cool feature I like about the FX3 is that it has 3 record lamps. One on the front, one on the top, and one on the rear. I don't know if you need that many record lamps to confirm that you're recording. Like, you should be able to know that you are recording when you push the record button, but hey, there are 3 record tally lamps. And then a few more unique things about the FX3 that's different to the A7S III. The FX3 has a zoom rocker, has like a little switch where you can zoom in, zoom out. You may or may not like it, like that feature might not apply to you. I think it's a handy feature, but again, you may or may not like it. And the last unique thing about the FX3 that's different to the A7S III is the audio. The FX3 can record 4 channels of 24-bit audio recording versus the A7 III, which can record 2 channels at 16-bit. And those are pretty much the main advantages of the FX3 over the A7S III. The only advantages that the A7S III has over the FX3 is that it has an EVF, obviously. Like even though the FX3 can take 12 megapixel stills, it's much better to use an EVF to take photos. The A7S III is lighter than the FX3, although not by much. The A7S III weighs 614 grams, where the FX3 weighs 640 grams. And then lastly, the A7S III is cheaper than the FX3. The A7S III is going to run you $3,500 US, where the Sony FX3 is going to cost you $38,999 US and 4,999 Canadian dollars. And so, with all that said, which camera should you get? The Sony FX3 or the Sony A7S III? First of all, you have to think of the Sony camera line in 3 different categories. You have your consumer products, like cameras like the Sony ZV-1, the RX100, RX10, RX0, etc., etc. That's one category. The second category is your prosumer line. Those are cameras from the Sony A1 all the way down to the Sony A6100. This is the Sony Alpha line. The Sony Alpha line from full frame to APS-C is designed for hybrid shooters, people that want to shoot video and photos equally. The third category, the Sony Cinema line, is designed for just filmmakers, people that specialize in video production. Cameras like the Sony Venice, FX9, FX6, and now the Sony FX3. If you already have a Sony Cinema camera, but you're looking for a smaller camera that can shoot similar quality video, then the FX3 is your camera. And because of the size and weight of the FX3, you can use that camera as a crash cam, as a drone camera, basically a B cam, a companion camera if you already have a Sony Venice, FX9, or FX6. Same kind of thinking if you already have a higher end Sony Alpha camera. So if you're like me, if you have the Sony A7S III and you're looking for a companion camera that can produce similar results, then I would probably go for a camera like the Sony A7C or the Sony ZV-1. Those cameras can produce similar results to the Sony A7S III, but they're much smaller, they're much lighter, and I can use those cameras as a companion camera to my main camera, which is the A7S III. This is how I see the FX3 fit into the Sony camera line. It's just a companion camera if you have a higher end Sony cinema camera. I don't necessarily think it's better than the Sony A7S III. I personally like the Sony Alpha line. I like shooting photos and videos equally. And so for me, for the work that I do, I feel way more comfortable with cameras in the Sony Alpha line. Oh, and if I could say this, there's one thing that I'm very disappointed in with the FX3. There's no internal ND filter. I mean, the FX6 has it, it's a cinema camera, but because the way the camera's designed, you can't fit an ND filter in the FX3, unfortunately. Although the ZV-1 has an ND filter, so well, there's that. Oh, that was a lot. That took longer than I thought, and I don't have a watch. But that's it for this video, and hopefully that explains the differences between the FX3 and the A7S III. Both very similar cameras, technically, with just a few differences that makes the FX3 geared towards more for the filmmaker, where the A7S III is designed for the hybrid shooter. But I would love to hear from you. What do you guys think of the Sony FX3? Would you get the camera? What are some things that you like? What are some things that you don't like? Any and all thoughts, let me know in the comments below. But I'm out of here. It is getting late. I'm tired. I want to go and get a milkshake, and so that's what I'm gonna do. I don't really have anything clever to say other than bye. Yeah, okay. Bye.